everybody, and welcome to E-commerce Quick Fix, the Cross-Border Magazine official podcast. Today we are here with Jenny Izaguirre, who happens to be a really special person. She is not only a long friend, but also happens to be one of the most renowned experts in intercultural competencies for multinational companies, which seems like a mouthful, but it is really interesting, really simple to explain, but really hard to master, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Thank you for having me. Thank you for welcoming me today. Yes, who's Jenny? I'm a person with a lot of cultures in her background. I grew up in a multicultural family. I've been living. Right now is my sixth country.
Wow.
Speak 6 languages and. With a major in simultaneous translation, which also implied a lot of culture.
You work in the United Nations?
I did work in the UN. I worked for the US government in their embassy in Venezuela, and then switched to the tech world, joining Shopify. It was a privilege to work with them, and Optibus, an Israeli company. So I have been exposed since early childhood to a lot of cultures.
You're Caribbean? You know the gringo culture.
Yeah.
You have been in Deutschland and you know the Germans.
Yes.
And of course, with Shopify, I think you were in Canada at the time.
I was in Canada.
So it's a little bit of everything, no? It's a bag of cats what you have there.
There's a lot going on. I grew up in a Venezuelan, Trinidadian, Guyanese family, and I've lived in Canada. I've worked in Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago. Lived in Italy, Latvia, Germany, Spain, and and I speak 6 languages, so it's a mix. And I've worked with a lot of people from all over the world, both in Canada and in Germany.
Before we continue,
Yes.
people is different,
Yes,
isn't it?
They are.
Because some companies try to sell the idea that, no, we are all humans, we are all the same, and it's not like that. And actually, it's a good thing, isn't it?
It is. Global cultures, it's beautiful to see and discover how similar we are as human beings, but also how different we are. And how different we are in terms of the way we perceive things, the way we communicate, and the way we interact with each other.
This is a little bit of what we are going to be talking about today, which is intercultural competences. Mm-hmm. What is this all about, and why is this relevant for businesses and brands? And please give us a little bit of your background, okay, to support this, and a few examples if possible. We know that you don't have to mention names, but just a little bit of what's the logic behind this, and why it is important for brands and businesses to be able to handle intercultural competences.
All right, so intercultural competences is that knowledge you acquire about different cultures around the world. But when I say culture, it's not only religious culture or geographical culture. What I mean is actually how people behave in those countries in terms of how do they provide feedback, how do they communicate, how they say things. Humor is a big example of this, because we have some very nice subtle humor in some countries. Some other countries have very dark and sarcastic humor that is sometimes offensive to some cultures. So when you're aware of all of these things, you avoid miscommunication and you avoid conflict.
So this is not only for marketing reasons, this is for operational reasons.
For everything.
For everything.
For life.
If you're doing cross-border, which is kind of our predilect topic here in Cross-Border Magazine, we love doing cross-bordering. Obviously, you need to understand the culture of the new market that you're breaking in.
Yes.
But also, if you have a multicultural team, you have to understand the different cultures of each one of your team members. Otherwise, the company just won't be able to run fluidly.
Yes.
Is this correct?
Yes, and there's a lot of conflict going on because we don't understand each other.
Is that happening right now?
It does happen.
Do you see that in multicultural companies,
Yes.
that those conflicts derive from not understanding the culture of everybody?
Yes, I've seen it, and I've seen a lot of people being passed on for promotions because the manager and the employee don't get along because of these intercultural competence differences. I have seen people not being hired or being fired from companies because of this. Some people are perceived as aggressive when they are not. They are just being direct in a culture that is indirect. So this applies for everything. It applies for classmates at school. It applies for colleagues at work. in your everyday life, even for my personal life with my husband. My husband is Spanish and I'm Venezuelan, and we speak a different Spanish. And yes.
Being both Spanish speakers, I'm gonna break you just for a moment here and make this pretty clear for everybody. The fact that there's 800 million people speaking Spanish, roughly, give or take. The fact that we all speak Spanish doesn't mean that we are all the same culture, okay? No. People from Latin America have different cultural heritage than the people from Spain. Colombians even, and Venezuelans are different. Argentinians and Mexicans, it's different. Even now, the booming U.S. Hispanic community, which is people speaking Spanish in the United States, and they are culturally different from the rest of the Spanish-speaking population, not to mention the old world here in Spain, which is roughly, really mark the difference between Spain and Latin America. So you know about multicultural in all environments.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it affects all the areas of your life.
The way you think, the way you approach problems, everything.
Yeah, I tell my friends as a joke that I have multiple personality disorder because I have a personality in every language that I speak to, but also because of the way I can approach people, even from very different backgrounds as mine. I always try to take it as a lesson, something that I can learn from this person, and I always ask them to educate me into what is it that I need to know about you that will help me understand you, get along with you, and not offend you in any way, because my culture is different from yours.
Now, it seems pretty obvious that from a personal level, it's important. It will be a competitive advantage to understand what makes the other person tick. But from a corporate level, from a business level, does this make any sense? Besides the marketing, because obviously on the marketing you want to understand how they think so you can sell them whatever you want to sell them. But from an operational level, it makes sense to train your company to be able to develop intercultural competencies. Is this something that can be trained?
It can be trained, and it is essential, especially if you have a multicultural, multinational company and you're operating all over the world and you have remote employees. After 2020, many companies decided to go fully digital. They decided to go fully remote, and they have people working all over the world. However, you have still conflict within teams, even if it's not like public conflict, but there are misunderstandings, there are conversations that are very difficult to have, and the lack of cultural awareness makes it even harder for the managers and for leadership, for the employees, for team members themselves. They have to build something, they have to build a product, and the product is not ready because they can't get along. Because they might think, oh, this person is incompetent, or this person doesn't communicate, or this wasn't done because this person didn't communicate what was being done. So yes, it's essential, especially if you want to work with remote employees.
It does affect the level of hostility or perceived hostility inside the organization, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, you feel like if you have to explain yourself 4 times to the same guy because you're not sure that if he's understanding or not understanding what you're saying, and it is due to a cultural trait, it is an issue for you. I mean, you need to be able to identify that, no, he's just like that. That's the way he takes on the information, but he is understanding. Can you train? How do you train this?
We assume that it is the other person's personality rather than
the other person's culture. Oh, we're talking culture, but what is culture exactly, Jenny? What are we talking about when we say culture?
Culture is built in every country, in every region, and it's this group of elements that characterize a group of people, a population. So we're talking about, we are including their history, their language, the common language. We speak Spanish, 21 countries speak Spanish. We have different cultures because there are other elements that surround this. So we're talking about the history. We're talking about the way feedback is provided, the way we express our agreement or disagreement. Body expressions. You have the Italians. This is very...
they say they speak with their hands.
They speak with their hands. Or you have in India, people moving their head like this.
Which in our culture... it could be understood as a no.
As a no.
I didn't understood, you know. And he's not saying that. It's just it's a thing.
And this person, when they are leaning their head like that, they might be saying it means that they are actually paying attention to you. or that they might be in agreement with you. So if you perceive this as a no, then, or you ask the person, do you understand me? And the person says yes, but while doing this, there is an issue in here. So culture also includes smaller social groups. You will find hipsters on one side. You find also what you know, the millennials, Gen Z, and people that love rap, or people that love certain way to dress up. So these all build cultures and subcultures, right? And we all identify with one or many of them. But then when we all come together, then we see our differences. And then communication problems start.
The different, the not understanding how to handle those different cultures creates friction inside organizations.
Yes, everywhere.
Can you give us an example of something that you have seen, like actually this created a huge problem for a brand or for a major multinational organization? Please, if you don't want to use the names of the organization, it's okay.
I'll give you an example of, well, I'll try to give many of them. One of them was with a very famous Mexican Tex-Mex food company. They sell burritos, and their marketing team in the US decided to, they were opening a store in France. And we, for those who don't know, La Liberté is a very famous painting in France, and is very, very important.
It's the one from Lady Liberty guiding the people.
Exactly.
During the Bastille, I think.
Yes, and with the flag.
With the flag, and she's bare-breasted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the designer in the US decided that he would replace, or he or she would replace, this flag with the burrito. Because they were landing in the French market. This was very offensive.
For French.
Yes. Yeah. And it was someone in their localization department that raised the red flag and said, no, this is not going anywhere. And we've seen this happen to other brands across the world. We've seen also Disney changing names of films and characters because they were inappropriate. Brands of cars, they name their car in a way that is offensive, or that is funny, or that it ridicules the brand somewhere else. So there has to be someone who's culturally aware to prevent these kind of disasters. Because once you invest in this as a company, this is money that you are going to waste.
Would you say that launching a cross-border operation is something that you should not do if you haven't had at least part of your team trained in intercultural competences? Or if it's something that is not needed? I mean, can I start selling globally without having knowledge of how to approach different cultures?
You need to know the market where you're going to.
That would be like the first basic step.
That is the first.
And it doesn't necessarily require an intercultural competence training.
You don't need to have an intercultural competence training for that, but you do need to know the market. Because, and I've seen this. I had a client once. He came to me for an e-commerce consulting service, but it ended up being a cultural issue. This person had a beautifully designed women clothing website that was catered to the Indian market, with everything that the Indian cultures imply.
Multiple cultures, right? Inside the same country, which also happens.
Yes, and the dresses and everything. It was a beautiful store, and this person wanted to compete with very Western brands in the Western world, and it was just not going to work. It was just not going to work because it was clearly Indian. So I asked this person, who do you want to sell to? To the Indian communities in these countries? No, I want to sell to the local communities in those countries. Well, then there's a UX design change that needs to happen here. We need to change the image and the branding and say, okay, expose into why is it that we want to cater a product, how we're going to cater our designs and so on. So knowledge of the market. And they did. It was hard to initially digest this idea, but it did work for them.
Now, Jenny, we are going to ask you about, I think it's a hot topic because it's currently happening right now. What's going on with the DEI departments, the inclusion, equity, or quality?
Yeah.
How does
Equity. Is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
All over the world, we are constantly listening and seeing news saying that they are closing the departments here and there. Major brands are just firing the people that they hire for that job. What's going on there?
Yes, it's
It is
it's
a hot topic.
It's a hot topic. In 2020 and 2021, we had the Black Lives Matter.
George Floyd situation.
George Floyd situation in the U.S.
May he rest in peace, by the way.
Yes, and it was a very
Nasty and
very
horrible situation.
Very hard situation for the family and for everyone in the
And it was representative also of a long-standing problem in the United States.
Yes, it is a social problem that is a long-standing one.
In the United States.
In the U.S., and it requires a lot of internal, political, and legal work. And I won't go into that deeply, but a lot of these departments were created as a reaction
to that situation
from companies in North America to that situation.
Did the Me Too movement also had something to do?
There was because everything was going on in parallel,
almost at the same time.
Yeah, and then we had the pandemic crisis, and it was just like, it was too many crises at the same time. However, they were created as a reaction for many companies. There wasn't really a strategy. There wasn't a vision into, okay, what are these initiatives going to evolve into? And nowadays, I see many companies, not only that are removing these departments from their payrolls, but also a lot of companies that don't really know what to do with these teams or with these initiatives, and how to break biases, for example. I recently was contacted by a company. They are, their head office is in the UK. They also have a team in Germany. And they were going through a bias training. So the problem was that, yes, they realized that there were biases and microaggressions in the company, but the training didn't go far enough into, okay, how do I actually solve this? And how many of these biases come from multicultural differences, upbringing? Because we all have biases. We all have, because we were all raised in different families and different countries, right? So.
And under different historical moments, different historical
Yes.
events, because
Yes.
I bet you, whatever you want, that the people in the United States rallying for the George Floyd cause, which was worthy,
Yes.
Would it be the same amount of people 50 years ago, probably, or 70, or maybe when the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King was going on.
Absolutely.
The George Floyd situation was kind of a daily occurrence in some states of the United States. So
Absolutely. And
time changes.
Yes, time changed, but also history in countries are different, right?
But you feel like there was no plan, no end game in here with these departments. There was no future-proof design to help them be useful for brands and businesses in the long term.
There was, but how can I say this? They would need to include the human behavior, history, and multinational culture components into these DEI departments or groups. Why? Because we've seen DEI from the generational point of view, Gen Z versus boomers versus millennials in a company. Or we've seen the LGBTQ movement versus none. We've seen blacks versus the rest of the world, and so on. But there's no understanding of the additional elements. And when I talk about intercultural training, is about human behavior, history of the countries that explains a lot of this behavior, and also how these two components affect communication between them. it is not the same, and as a Latin American who grew up in the Caribbean, it is not the same, the historical context and the everyday context of an Afro-American in the US it is not the same as a brown person or black person in the Caribbean. It's not the same.
Yeah, in fact,
the same treatment is not the same.
I can vouch for that as a Venezuelan, also Venezuelan raised and born. I was raised between Venezuela, United States, and Spain, so I do have a multicultural background also.
Yeah.
And the people in Venezuela, we don't even call them African Venezuelans. I mean, the government tried. They did try to implement something that was like African Venezuelan or so, like in an emulation of the African American. But our society is so mixed from a racial perspective. It's so mixed that we don't even care about that. Everybody's Venezuelan. I mean, we have Venezuelans that are more white, Venezuelans that are more brown. Who cares? Nobody cares about that. There is not that like, I feel like there is a strong division of races in the United States, which is not necessarily translated to the rest of the world. And that leads to another question.
Yeah,
those departments did work outside of the United States? Because
some did. And look, don't get me wrong, there is racism
all over the world.
Over the world.
But it's different.
The way it is expressed in different countries varies, right? So as I said, a black person from the Caribbean is not the same as an Afro-American from the US, historically and contextually speaking.
And even the culture of an African American right now is not the same than an African citizen, a citizen from a country in Africa.
And even like a black person living in Europe. So understanding all of these contexts allow us to interact better with our colleagues or our fellow citizens, whatever is it that we're actually
This
living.
kind of explains, Jenny, a little bit, perhaps, why the behavior of major brands, major global multinational brands that are selling cross-border across the whole world is different from market to market. Because we notice that. As user, I have noticed brands that I follow. For example, someday they change the logo to the LGBT flag in the United States and in Canada in their social media profiles, but they don't dare to do the same thing in their Kuwait or Saudi profiles, in social media. So is this a real corporate culture thing, or it's something that they are being pressured by the different regions in which they operate, or is it something that they do just to sell more?
Well, you have a legal aspect in the country, because you also have to respect the laws,
the current laws on legislation,
of the country. If this is a country that sets being from the LGBTQ movement as illegal, then the company should not openly promote it because it's illegal in the country. So you need to follow the rules. You have to follow the rules. Then you also have social, political pressure. You also have internal pressure in the company. You have the investors, depending on how big the company is. Investors will approve it or not approve it, will demand a few things or not. It is on a case-by-case basis that companies would allow to change their own logo, their own identity into any other cause. Not only I don't want to generalize, but I don't also want to specify to one cause. So whatever brand identity change depends on so many different factors. And we need to consider that when going into another country to sell, but also when hiring people from those countries.
Would you say that expressing or supporting or being advocate for these kind of social issues, it's profitable for brands and businesses?
It could be for many. It can be. It's again, this is on a case-by-case basis. I've seen in countries some companies go and support the local government at that moment, but then the government changes to the opposition, and then they lose business because they lose contracts, and people don't want them because they were supporting the previous government. Or you see a lot of people also selling, pro, left, right, up, down, whatever, and they profit from. And
do you feel like this the basic level of intercultural competences that should be taught, should be trained inside a company, should mingle with this, or are we talking about two different operational things? Like we should have a training to understand other cultures and be tolerant and be capable of working and having an operational environment in which all people from all races and cultures can express themselves. And this has nothing to do with the cultural flags that the company raises in any given particular moment so they can get more profit or political support or whatever. Are two different things?
I would say yes. I would say yes.
How can we start training people? For the first one. The second one, just leave it to the marketing departments, let them do whatever they want. But for the first one, which is the important one, how can we start training people to be more tolerant, more efficient, more capable of working with other cultures?
I would start with the company itself, because we're more than 8 billion people in this planet. So it is impossible to satisfy absolutely everyone. There will be someone that is not going to like us. That is a fact.
It's like that.
It's like that. So some people say you're not gelato, so not everybody's going to like you. And there's some people that don't even like ice cream, right? So the first thing, our company, our business needs to have its own identity, its own culture, its own values and principles they stand for. And just as we build our business plan, let's just also build our own identity. What is it that is, as my vision as a founder, what is it that I want my company to be like? I remember something that shocked me positively when I started working at Shopify. It is written in their documentation that they want to get shit done with those words.
Like that.
Just like that. So some investors weren't very.
I didn't know about that.
It's a thing, and it's a thing, and it was in some pictures,
placards and things
in the walls and stuff, and it was a thing, and it was part of the company's identity, right? So what is your identity as a business, as a company? Who are you? What is your profile? Just as part of your business plan, this should be included, right? Also for your investors to know where they are getting themselves into and in terms of the investment they want to do. So once you have that, then train your people. If you're going to be bringing in teams from all over the world, your HR department should know what is the identity of the company, and the many candidates they explore, see who fits with. There are companies that are still asking, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Which is moronic and constant. It's like the everyday question everybody asks when they want to force you into forecast your future and be reflexive and think about that.
The tell me about yourself question. Yes, there are HR techniques.
Which one will be like a more efficient, more profitable question to ask a candidate?
Get to know the person. Get to know the person. At the end of the day, as an employee who's applying, or a candidate that is applying for a job, I also need to get to know the company. And the trial period that you have with your employees before they become permanent, it is for that, to get to know each other, just like a relationship. You start dating and you see the first couple of months if it's going to work out, if it's going to...
So you actually need to take into consideration as a possible candidate, and also as a company that it's hiring someone, you need to take into consideration if there is a cultural match.
Yes. And then also get to know the person. Where does this person come from? I was a Venezuelan living in Canada. So there was something there.
Something happened.
Something happened that made me move and leave my country. So if you're going to start bringing people on board from all over the world, it is essential that your HR department is aware of all of this, and they can match your corporate identity as a company with your new employees. So make them aware of the different cultures, and these traditional HR questions, let's expand them a little bit to know where the person's from, what their backgrounds, what is it that there is to learn from these new cultures or these new languages, their humor, how do they tackle difficult situations or difficult conversations. And once you get to know this person, make it a comfortable conversation so that you actually get to know the human being behind the expert that you're hiring. Once you get that, then you move into the technical questioning and the technical interviews with the rest of the team.
That will be the part that you assess the proficiency of that person for whatever given
Yes.
role, no?
Yes, because they might be the best developer of the world,
But impossible to work with.
But impossible to work with. Because
Or at least impossible in that particular team configuration.
Particular culture or corporate culture.
Now, Jenny, do you have any way to train? Do you offer training for brands and businesses? Because I'm sure that more than one CEO is watching us right now and they're saying like, hey, I need this. Do you offer any support in that way?
I do. I'm working currently on a case-by-case basis with companies because every company has their own particular challenges.
This is a bespoke service. I mean, you have to do it tailor-made for each one.
Yes, I do it tailor-made for each one of them. We start with a coaching session or an intro session to get to understand what the problem is, how we can tackle it, and then I not only go into the do you have a bias or not question, but I try to go into, okay, how do we actually tackle this? How do we actually solve this? And how do we actually overcome the bias? Because otherwise, you will not solve the problem.
And is this profitable for brands and businesses to train themselves at a cultural level?
Absolutely. Because you increase productivity, you increase team cohesion, better communication among teams, and you can work more effectively. And that translates into products being ready on time or before, selling more, communicating better. And
expertise retention also, because the people won't leave the company.
Tenure.
Yeah.
Your employees will stay longer. And some people have resigned their companies because they got feedback in a way that is offensive to their local culture. And you lose an expert right there. And it is more expensive to hire and rehire than retain a talent.
It is expensive to train people when they are new in a company or organization? Because there is a whole debate on this, a whole discussion globally. It's saying that, I don't know, just fire the guy and get a new one. Yeah, but get a new one, that new one, you have to train him from zero, which is expensive, isn't it?
The time, yes, because the time for this person to have impact then expands again. It will take new employees around 6 months to know what they're actually doing in the company, because they're getting to know everybody, the team, the company, what it does, the product, the services, and so on. So it takes about 6 months to onboard a person into a company. And then if you have to let this person go after 6 months or a year, you have wasted 6 months. 6 months of salary of that employee, but also 6 months of everybody else's salary who has been working on training and onboarding this person. So yes, it is better for companies to keep their employees.
Definitely. Now, Jenny, everybody should go cultural competence on training, or this is something that is more aimed to CEOs, managers? Which one is the level inside the hierarchy?
Everyone.
Everyone, absolutely
this
everyone.
Is for everybody. I'll give you an example. There's motivational speakers that we all know from YouTube. He's very, very well known. And he was interviewed by a Latin American marketer who's also very well known in the Spanish-speaking community. And the guy has a name that can be misspelled and be a curse in Spanish. So because of his lack of cultural awareness, he kept saying that as a joke over and over again in this interview that was live on YouTube. The face of the host, she was so embarrassed. And I've seen that happen. And
we're talking about a guy that normally is on spot every time he's in front of the camera.
Yes, it's Tony Robbins level famous.
Quality.
Yeah, famous. Not quality, but famous. The guy is very known. So I don't want to name him, but it was very embarrassing. There was another person, C-level executive. He was giving a talk. He is one of the best presenters and speakers that I've ever met. But he was given a talk to a global audience, and the examples were around death, and he mentioned Oprah Winfrey several times. A lot of people in the audience were from Asian countries where death is something very critical and very delicate. It's a very delicate topic. You should not be talking so openly about it. So a lot of people were offended after the talk. That was not ill intended at all. And he mentions Oprah Winfrey several times with the memes, and you get this and you get that, and people after the talk, they came to me because I was working in the same office as this person, and they were like, "Who's Oprah Winfrey?"
Oh my God!
Who's
yeah,
that?
Of course.
Yes, she's ultra famous in the U.S.,
but
Canada,
not necessarily
globally.
Yeah, the realms of influence, no?
Yes.
Knowing your realm of influence. But
Absolutely.
now, Jenny, this happens obviously in a talk show. It happens also in a video. It happens in a meeting. But it can also happen on as a daily occurrence on an email that goes ugly, goes wrong.
Yes.
Because you send something that the other person culturally it shocks them. Yes. So
it can happen with your colleagues. It can happen. It has happened to me so many times. That I've had to sit down and ask the person, okay, educate me, please tell me. Sometimes they don't even want to tell me, but I have to stress, look, there's a cultural difference in here. I may have screwed up what I just said, but I need you to understand that and I want to learn, you know? And it can happen every day. For teams, there's something called high context and low context. There are cultures that need a lot of detail, a lot of explaining, a lot of hand-holding. Latin American is one. We need a lot of hand-holding, and this is how you do things, step by step, and so on, manuals and stuff.
It's a level of, I think, I don't know, but I feel like the higher the level of confidence that culture has with whatever they are doing, the lower the level of support they need. In Latin America, we don't trust in anything, so we need this high level of support that explain to me in detail exactly what you want, you know, which is not common, for example, for the Germans, in my experience. They don't need that. It's not such a level of handheld, you know.
It goes beyond the level of detail. It also goes beyond because it goes into the Spanish-speaking cultures being more of a human relationship based.
That is true.
Culture. So because we're humans, we don't necessarily write everything in an email. We rather just I'll go to your desk and talk to you and tell you what's going on. And because Joe missed our conversation, he has no context, right? There might be a problem there because he needed to know the information that you and I exchanged, right? But there are other cultures that are more low context. They don't need to share that much information. And let's say I ask you to go to the nearest restaurant and I just give you, you just go to the corner and do this. But this restaurant is actually 10 blocks away. And I did not give you any context because you're supposed to know
the way to navigate that.
Yes, and you're supposed to know that, right? This is, people call it common sense, but it's not necessarily common sense. It's actually knowledge of the local culture and the local place and so on. So it is essential not only for C-level, but also for colleagues. And for that talent that you eventually want to promote in your company. Because you want this person to be culturally aware so that when they become a manager or director or whatever the role it is, then they are also aware to treat their employees and their direct reports fairly.
One final advice, Jenny, for brands and businesses wishing to sell globally from a cultural perspective. What is the first thing they need to do?
Know your market. Where is it that you're going to? Don't try to go into every single market at once. Go regionally. Try to go into small, even if it's a smaller region, it's better than trying to expand globally because it's an impossible task.
So step by step.
Step by step. There are way too many things that you need to consider.
And obviously we're talking about culture here. We're not talking about knowing your market from a profit or market share or product perspective, which is obviously needed.
It's also
But we're talking
necessary.
about from the cultural perspective.
Yes.
It's not only knowing if your product will be or not both or sold in France, but what the French people will think about your product and how they will relate to your brand, isn't it?
If it's actually necessary, if it's not offensive, if it's useful, if it's, selling bikinis in the Arctic in the middle of the winter,
It's just not going anywhere.
might not be the best idea. But also legally, if you are a payment method, you need to comply with certain tax regulations and certain requirements that must be part of your product or your website or your communication strategy. Internally, also with the employees, the way they communicate, because that is the biggest point of friction. Because employees assume that it is the other person's personality, and it's not. It's just part of their culture. The way cultures give instructions is completely different from the way they give feedback. And you will see in a North American, for example, giving a lot of very detailed instructions, do A, B, C, D, da, 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 da. Whereas when they need to give feedback, then they are very reserved. And we have the sandwich, We see the very nice wording, everything nice that you did, and then very downgrading the words into the negatives. Oh, there is a little bit of a
There's a lot of candy coating there.
There's a lot of sugar coating. And then at the bottom, a lot of more niceness of what you did. And then if you're giving this style of feedback to someone from a very direct culture, like French, Germans, I talk about the Germans that I'm very close to. It's a nonsense. And a lot of people end up that feedback session into, oh, I wasn't perfect, but yeah, it was good. Yeah. But then
that's not the reality.
It's not the reality, because this person then finds out that they are being put on probation or they are being fired, but that's not what they gathered from.
This can actually botch any attempt of expanding into a different country, because regardless of what you might think, if you're trying to sell your products to the French or to the German or to the Dutch, perhaps at the beginning you will be able to just deliver products from wherever you are in the world, but eventually if you expand and that things go well, you will have such a large volume of sales, of interactions with that market, that you will be eventually forced to recruit natives from that market to attend the needs of that specific market.
Yeah.
Even the chat thing, nowadays everybody wants to use ChatGPT for dealing with markets that they are not able to speak the language or know or don't have knowledge of the culture. At the end of the day, you will eventually have to find a native team of people.
You need a local person.
So you will have to deal with with that culture one way or another,
Yes.
either from the very beginning when you're selling the products, or at the end of the day when you have to incorporate that culture into your own team of people.
Yes.
So there's no way to avoid this.
No, it is not. And I've been in situations where I'm attending an event in Spain or in Italy, and I've had to tell my colleagues with pictures, this is how you should dress for this event, so that you're taken seriously, because you're an executive of the company, and if you show up in jeans and flip-flops, it's not going to work. You're not going to make a deal. If you don't go for coffee with the Italian, then
that's not going to work.
It's not going to happen. Then the human connection. There are cultures that are very used to managing everything by email, and they would rather die before talking on the phone with a client. There are many other cultures that if you don't talk to me on the phone or in person, better in person, there's no deal. And these are things that we need to be aware of when we do business.
One final advice to not blunder in the cultural level?
Be open. Be open.
And be honest, perhaps?
Be honest. Be open. Well, honesty can be culturally different.
Can be dangerous.
It can be culturally different. expressed in a culturally different way between countries. But be open to learning. Ask the other person if you are not sure that you're getting the right message. Ask. And something I say a lot is, help me understand what is going on, what is the situation. Help me understand if this feedback was correct. Help me understand why are you doing this thing in this manner. So that there's this openness to understanding, but also better communication.